Aloha and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about namespace and scope resolution. So a namespace basically maps names to objects. So when we're talking about names, we're talking about variables and the names of variables, the names of functions, things like that. So a namespace, it's essentially a normal Python dictionary where the keys are the names that you're going to use, like your variable names, your function names, and the values are the objects themselves. So you can actually check out what you have in terms of your current local and global namespaces using the locals and globals functions that are built in. So I'll go ahead and show you a little bit of that right now. Let's pull up code, and we're going to start with nothing at all. We're going to start with print locals. And oops, not local, but locals, locals only. We're going to hit print here. And what does it give us here? It gives us a bunch of reserved names here. These are some of the things that you get automatically defined within the function, because up until now we have nothing defined, right? So all of these, what we call the dunder, the double underscore names here, and they're all essentially, this is all what we call cruft. It's just the things that you get for free that are initially in there. And locals, these are the local ones, but if you remember correctly, if we're looking at the top scope, the global scope here, we should see that they're equivalent essentially. So we take a look at that and we see that pretty much all the same things, even the addresses here are the same. So we have the same things in locals as we do globals. So let's go ahead and let's say x equals 1. And let's see what happens to our locals. So we'll go ahead and run that again. And we notice down here that we've got a change. We have x, and it has a value of 1 in it. So we can see that it's got 1. And of course, it's going to be the same for global at this point. So if we were to reprint globals, we should see the same exact thing there, which we do. Over here, x is 1, x is 1. So because we know that these two are equal, I'm just going to cut out globals for now. So now let's take a look at what happens when we define a function. So we're going to define a function called my function, and we're going to just print hi, and then we'll come down here and let's print locals again, see what happens. So when we print locals, we're going to see that now we have over here my function, and so this is our dictionary essentially, and then we have my function, and it's assigned to the function, my function at memory address here. So that's what's in our locals. But now we have that. Now let's do a quick check and see what is the value of locals within that local function, or that function essentially. So we hit this, and just to make this a little bit easier to read, let's rip out these prints right there. So yeah, one thing that you're going to notice here is that we're not actually calling on it. So let's go ahead and call it right here, my function, and run it. Let's clear this because it's looking kind of messy. So we run it, and what do we get? We get hi because it's running that. And we're also going to get the definition down here. So we're printing out locals here. Actually, we're printing it in 2 places, so that's going to be a little bit on the messy side. Well, no. So the first one, it's going to print the locals from inside the function, and that gives us essentially an empty list. We don't have anything defined there. Then we get the hi, which is over here. So let's go ahead and define y equals 2 and run that and see what happens. So boom, when we do that, we get over here, we get y equals 2. This is the local context up here. So we've got y is equal to 2. It prints out high, and then it goes back to printing out the locals at the top level. Notice that y is not in here. Why? Because y is defined as a local variable up here in my function. So that should make sense here. So, but you notice that locals up here, when we defined it, we only had y equals 2. We don't have x equals 1 because that's not this, that's not the local context up here. If we do that print locals and we also do a print of globals up here, then we're going to see over here we've got y equals 2, but the globals are just as we have down here. It's going to include x as 1. It's going to include everything else that you see down here. So locals will give us the variables within those local functions, and global is going to give us the information for the global context. And you'll notice that within a function and outside at the top level, you're still going to have the globals will be pointing to essentially the same things. So namespaces are essentially how we make scopes work. With this name to value thing, we can tell, we can let the interpreter know what variables we have available at each scope that we're working with. So each scope there is going to have its own namespace. And if a namespace has a name, then that name is visible for use in that scope. So you have 3 nested scopes available at any point. And the scopes that you have are referred to as, the first one is the built-in scope. So you have a built-in scope, that dictionary of names to objects. The built-in scope is going to map things like int. Remember, we have those built-in functions like int, string, list, things of those natures. So we have that one built in for free. Then we have the global scope, which we showed up here with the globals. Built-in function. So that's going to give you the things that are defined globally. Then you have the local scope, which is the scope like here within my function. It's going to be the scope for there. You do have one more scope, and it's really the local, but also the things that are defined within that local one. So if you have nested functions like we showed before, we're going to have another layer of namespaces here, or another layer of scope. So if we had, let's say, in here we had define your function, and we went over here and we just said z equals 1, and then we wanted to print the locals for here. What do you think we're going to find here? We're going to find that, hold on, first of all, this is getting a little bit crowded. Let's do it clear, and then let's hit play, and we do that, and we come up here. We've got that defined, but actually, I don't think we're executing this. So let's go ahead and try executing it here, your function, and run it. So yeah, so when we do, notice that we get the scope up here. So this is our internal, this is our scope within a scope, our, our function within a function. So we have our Z scope set up over here. So our Z in the namespace in the scope at this level. So that shows you that additional. And so remember we have the built-in scope, which is your namespace for like integer, string, all the built-in functions. You have the global scope, which is everything that's defined at the highest level. And then you have the local scope and the local scope within a local scope type thing. So those are the different levels that you've got there. And the names for your variables are looked up in the local scope first, and then it's looked up in the global scope second. And then it looks up lastly in the built-in scope. So it's going to hit them in that order. If it finds in the first one, that's the one it's going to match with. Otherwise, it's going to move up to the global second, and then the built-in scope last is where to look. So if it doesn't find any match for the name that it's looking for. So if your variable doesn't match to something, it's going to give you a name error. So we can go ahead and test that out. So we can print something like over here. We know we don't have Z defined at this level. So if we try printing Z, and you can already tell because it's giving us a row raggy squiggle under it. So if we look in here, it's saying not defined. If we hit that, there we go. We get the name error that we talked about. It's saying that name Z is not defined. So this is the process of searching for names within namespaces. It's called scope resolution. In other words, you're trying to resolve which scope your variable is defined in. So that whole process, it's known as scope resolution. So this stuff can be tricky. It's just important to know, really, when you're defining variables, to know where they have scope, where they have meaning, and to understand when things don't work the way you think they should. It helps to take a look and really sort through what your namespaces are. And you have these keywords like locals, these built-in functions like locals and globals that'll help you define, or to at least see what you've got defined in different scopes. So if you're having a problem and you think that X should be 4 at this point, but X is coming out as 2, if you go ahead and print out your globals and debug it that way, you can kind of get an idea of how things are defined at different in different places. So this can be a helpful tool to use. But scope resolution, it's something that you're going to come across in all languages, whether it's JavaScript, C#, whatever. You're going to find the same concept there. So this is it in a nutshell. So anyway, if you have any questions about this, if you don't quite understand the concept, I understand as we dig further and further into functions, it does get a little bit more complex and it takes a little while to wrap your head around these ideas. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to send me an email, reach out to me. I'll be happy to do a Zoom session with you. Just let me know. So take care and I'll see you in the next lesson.